Coming up, Nic Claxton faces an uncertain future with the Nets. I'll tell you why his time with Brooklyn could be coming to a close after this.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Nets podcast right here, the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik, Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. This show is 100% free on all those great platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And on today's show, I'm going to be breaking down Nic Claxton's future with the Nets, analyzing his performance in recent seasons and whether he's a long-term fit with Brooklyn's new timeline. And I'm joined now by Lucas Kaplan of Nets Daily, frequent flyer here on the Locked On Nets podcast. And we are kicking off a series where we're going to be talking about some of the Nets rotation pieces from this past season, giving our opinions on their outlook and whether we feel that they are going to be long-term fits with the team. And the first player that we are starting with is Nic Claxton, who is the Nets' longest-tenured player, a guy who has been here for the long haul relative, obviously to the other guys on the team. And just so you guys know the parameters of this, we're talking about, in Nic Claxton's case, him being a starting center. Is he a fit? How do you feel about him being a long-term piece, anchoring your team at the 5? And Lucas, we both seen Clax play for a long time under a lot of different circumstances. So when you evaluate what you've seen from him throughout his Nets tenure last year in Jordi Fernandez's system, how do you feel about him as the starting center on a team that you're trying to build out long-term?
Aside, I'm assuming not really including like the specifics of his current contract, just like as a player, long-term.
Yeah, well, I think his current contract is a fine, thing to use as a base benchmark. Let's just say starting center, paying him starting center money, not star center money, just starting level, guy.
Which they are, it's like around 25 a year. It's de-escalating. It's, through the next 3 seasons, including this upcoming one. And if you ask me this 2 years ago after his 2023 campaign, I'm, all for it. And I was really, hyped about Nic Claxton and really a big fan. And the last 2 years have been a lot rougher. And there are a lot of factors at play which make this an interesting conversation and make it hard to really nail his value down, right? Because it's like, is he just dealing with some back stuff? Is that going to get better? Is that kind of muting his impact? Is the night-to-night effort there? How much is that tied in with the back stuff? Is the NBA maybe moving away a little bit from what he does well? Like, we've seen how big and physical lineups in the playoffs are, and that is not really his skill set. To put it mildly or reductively, he's more of a finesse guy. And so all of these questions have made me really unsure, how to answer that question. Whereas 2 years ago, I would have said, yeah, like slam dunk, he can be a starting center on a really great team, and you can pay him starter level money. He's only 26. I don't think he's like washed or past his prime, back stuff notwithstanding. We got to see how that goes. But it's going to be, I don't want to say like a big year for him, but I'm continually invested in his development, and we'll talk about the specifics, but I think you could say he's at a bit of a career crossroads. He just signed the contract, so not in that sense, but a career crossroads in terms of what is this guy's long-term fit in the NBA, on Brooklyn to that extent.
And it's really interesting because, you hit on it. We saw him during that 2022-23 season really just break out and emerge as a defensive player of the year candidate. That campaign lost a little steam after they traded KD and Kyrie, but he really was just a menace, switching onto the perimeter, whether, even in drop as a rim protector, just doing all of those things. And he also, I think he led the league in field goal percentage that year. He was at like 71% from the field. Everything he was throwing up was going in on the hook shots, like all of that. And we've really seen both ends of that regress. We've kind of seen a parallel. We've seen the Nets regress as a team, obviously, from a team with title aspirations. And with that, Claxton's impact has regressed similarly. You know, obviously not to one of the worst players in the league, as the Nets have the worst team in the league. But
Right.
I think that there's a lot of things that give you pause about him, because I think, let's start on the defensive end of the ball, because we saw him. That was his calling card, obviously, during that 2022-23 season. The Nets were playing a very switch-heavy scheme. He was locking up some of the NBA's top ball handlers and scorers on switches. And we've seen them go away from that a little bit. And I think we've seen his impact on that end of the floor in turn, you know, be diminished somewhat. Just how do you feel about, you know, his defensive impact if you're not necessarily playing that switch heavy scheme and you're doing some things that more teams might be doing traditionally coverage wise?
Well, one of the reasons I really loved his 2023 campaign is because I perceived him to be truly A+ switch big kind of guy. Not many better in the league, especially pre-Wemby, but also a B level drop coverage guy, and better at some of the, you know, much better than when he entered the league at some of the traditional anchor things. Like, not the best communicator, not yelling out coverages and getting guys in the right spots, but like can play between two, can break up lob passes, you know, defensive rebound rate 20%, which is typically the threshold for like, okay, this guy's a pretty decent defensive rebounder as a big, maybe not, you know, Steven Adams, but up there. And I thought that there was a lane for him to be like, we saw it at the end of games, where at the end of games, they'd be like, okay, let's mix up coverages, go switch, go throw a wrench in the other team's offense. And I thought being good enough in more traditional schemes, but having the wild card maybe up his sleeve was enough to be like, you know, maybe he won't be in the DPOY race, but like a very impactful big man defender, because also he's just so great at like kind of the traditional help side stuff, coming over, you know, when the driver isn't his man for a block. And I thought he was getting better at like, oh, I won't block this. I won't chase this block. Like, let me box out instead. And there was enough kind of continual improvement in the minor things, as well as like this explosion, this leap, like you said, where I was really, really impressed with his defense. And since then, I think some of the, you know, the back, I think, is a real thing. Like, he just doesn't frequently look as explosive. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, and we know that he was battling a back injury. You know, he had a hamstring issue at the beginning of the season, and then we later found out, he told us that he had been battling a back injury that restricted his training the previous offseason, and that he got the epidural, we remember, in the beginning of the year. And he told us at the exit interview that it's something that was still bothering him, you know, when
still has to get it right. Yeah.
But I thought that was interesting, because it's like, he played 70 games last season. The Nets were a team that by all accounts was trying to lose. So if he has this back issue that was bothering him so much, why were the Nets playing him through a back injury in a season where they should be trying to lose games? Like, that just never added up to me. I'm not saying that he didn't have that injury. I just think the whole situation was
Yeah, it was weird to an outsider. And I actually think, you know, from what I've heard, like, people like him. He likes Brooklyn. Yeah. Like, I don't think, I mean, listen, the technical fouls, especially in the beginning of the year, like some of the clear kind of lapses in effort are not what you want, but I have never really perceived him to be this tough guy to deal with as a coaching staffer in the locker room. And you don't hear that stuff. And, you know, I don't want to just make excuses, but like, he's been in a tough situation. You're this rising center for a great team, and then the rug is swept out from under you. And I know that $25 million a year is supposed to alleviate some of those worries, but like, all of a sudden he's on a 19-win team or 26-win team. Like, that's not the easiest thing to deal with. But you know, it's like supportive of, like, never heard anything about him and Dayron, who's kind of coming for his minutes. But anyway, I think all of the, you know, based on what we've described, he's not really a guy where the motor can shut off. Like, he does not have that margin of error where he can take some possessions off and still be that impactful, because in this increasingly physical league, he will get pushed around. Like, if he's kind of haphazardly going for a block in help and it's the, you know, the wrong decision, and he's just kind of lazily chasing a block and leaving his guy open for a putback, that's the stuff that, like, he makes him not a top 50, 60 player, 70 player that I thought he was in 2023. That he just can't afford that. So the defense has taken a hit. I would love to see a season where he's on a pretty good team that mixes up coverage. Hey, Jordy should be the coach for that, more so than Jacques Vaughn. Like, you can trap some, you can switch some. We're still going to do a little bit of drop. You could come over from the weak side. I would love to see a full season of him healthy, engaged, really trying, and see what his value is on defense in an NBA that is increasingly physical. More teams are attacking the offensive glass, which hurts him. So that's kind of where I'm at with his defense.
Yeah, and I think what you said about the motor is a really good point, because he's a guy we're seeing the NBA trend towards being bigger. Like, there's kind of been a resurgence of size. We saw it in the playoffs with a lot of these guys where you talk about, Miles Turner, Hartenstein, Cat is bigger, but obviously has some deficiencies on defense.
And just double big lineups too.
Yeah, just more size, more bulk, the rebounding battle, all of those things. And I think what you said about him, he's a guy who his impact, like, he's not this dynamic offensive player, and we're going to talk about his offense. A lot of his impact is coming on the defensive end. A lot of his impact is motor dependent. And if that's something where, you're going to need a guy who's really motivated, you're going to need a guy who's really bought in on a consistent basis. And you're also going to need somebody who is going to be able to age well. And if he's having back issues and all these things, and, his impact is somewhat dependent on his defensive impact, his motor, his explosiveness, all that kind of leads you to wonder, how is his game going to age? And we'll talk about that, obviously. But I want to get into the offensive side of the ball. So we're going to take a quick break. Then we'll talk about Claxton's offensive side of the ball. We'll talk about what we saw from him last season and how we think that kind of meshes with what he can do on the other end of the floor. But before that, I want to tell you about our friends over at Game Time. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with family or friends? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch. And they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Guys, Game Time is the official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB, making it easy to browse the app for any Yankees, Mets game you want to go to. Are you tired of endlessly scrolling to find the best deal? Game Time's Zone Deal picks the best seats in your section for you. The seat views are right on the app before you buy, so you know exactly where you'll be. Guys, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Coming back from the break on today's Locked On Nets episode, talking with Lucas Kaplan about Nic Claxton and whether we feel he's going to be a long-term fit with the Nets. And we said, his defensive impact obviously has waned somewhat. There's a lot of factors there, but I think it's interesting because the offensive side of the floor, he's never really been somebody who's been a dynamic offensive player. And you would think with some of the limitations he has on that end, the defensive end of the floor, he really needs to stand out on that end. But I want to dig in a little bit more to the offensive side and what he can be, because we saw some flashes during that 2022-23 season, at least from the finishing around the rim, the efficiency, some different shots that he had at the rim and in the short mid-range. He was really consistent on those. And that's kind of regressed year over year over the last two seasons. And I feel like there haven't been a lot of tools added to the toolbox. He's this guy who obviously is a rim runner. He's a lob threat. He can score on some putbacks and some, off script sequences, but not a jump shooter, not much of like a floater game or an in-between game or anything like that. So how do you feel about what he does on that end? And do you think those limitations or the lack of development and tools added to the tool bag is something that's going to hold him back from reaching this next level of player?
Not necessarily. I mean, if you look at the really, really good non-star centers in the league, how many of them have to, I don't want to say have a bag or shoot threes, but, have a more diverse skill set than what he showed in 2023. Just skill set. Like Jared Allen, not really. Isaiah Hartenstein, like, yes, with the short roll passing and stuff, but like Nic Claxton, markedly better finisher right at the rim. You could argue maybe that's a worthwhile trade-off. Miles Turner does shoot threes. Zubats has a post game, but I don't think it's like this Grand Canyon gap when he's at his best. And, maybe some of the other offensive impact from like the non-Jokic Embiid tier of guys. The thing that stood out to me with his offensive game is like when he's leading the league in field goal percentage, and it is not all just easy putbacks or easy tip dunks. A lot of it was, he's playing with Kyrie, KD. The Nets had a really good offense that year. But, you and I saw him start to like try to go coast to coast. I have many like 2-minute compilations on my Twitter. I'm sure if you go back far enough, you kind of felt like the 3 to 10 foot range, on Basketball Reference, like floaters, hooks would regress a little, but that kind of falling off a cliff and the finishing right at the rim, maybe due to the back stuff falling off a cliff, or taking a significant hit in 2024 and then rebounding only slightly in 2025. We need to where is that really? How good of a finisher is he really to know how great of to know the offensive player he can be? Like, I'm not saying he has to be the best finisher in the league, but if he's, an 80th percentile, like rim finishing big, who can hit some floaters, who can hit some hook shots, in addition to dunking and being, very dexterous and all that stuff, that is a good offensive center. It's not sexy, but it's a good offensive center.
It's definitely a good offensive
pressure. Yeah, it puts pressure on the rim. That's what
I just remember that 2022-23 season when he shot like 71% from the field. Yeah. And he was just, everything he threw up was going in. It was like,
it wasn't that.
Yeah, it was like catch, is like rebound, turn, like left-handed, like fastball off the glass, and it was dropping in. I remember being like, holy crap. Like, I don't know if these shots are going to go in like all the time, because I don't know. He just has never struck me like, he doesn't have bad touch, but he's not like the soft touch on the floater type of guy. You know what I mean? So
no,
it's really, and this is subjective, it's really just like me watching in my opinion on it, but I just don't know like how much his finishing style holds up.
Right. I mean, it's very much like I'm using length and athleticism to just get this over you. And so I think the hope is like his touch is good enough to where him being able to like access all these crazy shots makes him a plus finisher. But if it dips, not really. I will say I found this stat. The processing is too slow to be like a really great hub guy and like short roll passer. But first 35 games this year, his assist ratio was 2 assists to like 1.4 turnovers. And then the rest of the year, the next 35 games or whatever it was like 2.6 to 1.2. So it was over 2 assist turnover ratio. Not, earth shattering, but I think he did get better at that stuff where he can be decent. The screening is tough, more so than like the floor rooting. He's not a great screener. So I don't really know how I feel about all the, DHO stuff and delay actions and all that above the break.
Yeah, and he's also, I think his offensive game, and this correlates to both ends of the floor, but we talked about how we're seeing the league go towards, further towards size, these double big lineup, a lot of these bulkier bruising centers, and Clax obviously isn't that. And when you see him, like you said, he's more of a finesse player, and he is, but he doesn't have that, like, he's actually, like, I don't think he's a bad rebounder by any of the stretch of the imagination, but he's he's like this slighter center. He's not a guy that's going to push you around. He really needs to be engaged and on it to do those things. And then on top of that, offensively, he doesn't have the outside shot. He's not really somebody with like short roll, like floater in between game. Like, he's not a bad passer, but as you said, there's some screening limitations. I just don't know with him. You see a lot of these guys, maybe like if you talk about like a Holmgren, who like don't have the size and the bulk in this thing, but they're doing these other things where they're a little bit of like a coverage buster, or they're just an elite guy at the rim defensively. And I don't know if Claxton has that. So the trade-off between those two things is something that concerns me a little bit.
Yeah, that was my hope for him. Like in 2023, there were moments where he's like catches it in the short roll and he's not diming people up, but it's like, I'm just going to go score. And I remember there was a game against Sacramento and they started switching and they'd like post him up / ISO him in like, 8 to 10 feet against Malik Monk. But he was like, okay, dribble, finish.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying he's going to be 25 and 10, but I do think there could be more of that in his game where he has some limited, not one-on-one stuff, but can access more points and things like that. And the motor again is really key.
Yeah.
His best sequences, like there's the Joel Embiid sequence where he blocks him and then runs past him, like run the floor. Like that is what he's really good at in transition. If you want to play fast, that's where he can really excel. And he has the body type and athleticism for it, where you can be like, oh man, this guy's one of the best transition offense centers in the league. That's not like Jokic. But if the motor's not there, then those skills aren't there. So
and how much does that concern you about how his game is going to age? Because he's not one of these guys who, like, you have some of these bigger centers who, maybe being bigger lends you to some concerns about like how the injuries and joints and stuff like that. But they're like, they don't need to be so explosive. They have this bulk. They can get position. They can push people around. They can be a little bit more grounded in some spots, where Claxton has to really have that motor, that speed, that athleticism. And he's having injury concerns. And also just, he's still young, but he's a lot older than the guys who the Nets just brought in their rebuild. By the time the Nets are competing, he's going to be a little bit older. He'll be pushing up close to like 30 probably. And we'll see how his body holds up. But just what are your concerns about that with the type of style that he has to play to be impactful?
They need to figure out the back. I don't know what to make of it unless I know like where his back is at. Like, do they think, I mean, what is he just kind of, is his athleticism a little bit muted forever? Because that reduces his ceiling. Is it a thing where he gets an epidural and like, maybe at 2 months he's working it out, but then it's like, oh, I'm feeling good again. And it, you don't want it to be that, like, I've seen him still get up to the top of the square and have these really explosive moments. And I don't think it's gone, but if it's going to be a thing where every time he exerts that effort, it really like hurts and does some long-term damage, then I don't know. But, I think because he's 26, it's more like, I would love to really get some clarity on the injury. And there's still time to do that before he, really ages out of his prime. And let's say we get clarity on that and he's still, 26, 27, even 28, then we can see, okay, how's this guy's game going to age? Because we really don't have a big injury-free sample from him in his whole career, which is odd to think about.
And he, last year, like I said about him having the injury, but still playing through it, all this, he looked like a diminished version of himself athletically last year. And there were like moments where you'd see him kind of go back to what he did before. And you're like, okay, like that's the flash. Like he looks healthy. He looks motivated in that moment.
Right.
And then you see him kind of regress. I also,
for 2 years, for like the last 2 years, honestly.
Exactly. And I'd also want to touch on, we got a few minutes left in the segment before we have to close it out. But if we're talking about his offense, I think we have to mention like the Nets point guard play, the Ben Simmons effect, which I think the Ben Simmons presence really didn't do Claxton any favors. I think it was really a disservice to him by this Nets organization. So, how much do you like that and the lack of point guard play? We're picking apart his offensive impact, but that is tough, with what he's had to deal with.
I mean, very tough. And, so he's not a great screener and, DHO guy in that way, like creating screening angles, which the wings need, like Cam Johnson needed, Michael Porter Jr. will need if he's, coming off the wing, or even Cam Thomas, but like kind of more just traditional, not ISO, but like guys that can really ISO and play pick and roll and can really benefit from like this downhill vertical spacer. Those guys can really use Claxton. Like, for example, Kyrie and KD can operate in the mid-range and from the top of the key. So they really love and can really benefit from a vertical threat where the back line of the defense is like, if I creep too far up, Nic Claxton's catching a lob on my head.
Yeah.
But Cam Johnson and Cam Thomas, what they need is like, I need a good screen at this level so I could get to my jumper. Like I need some help creating space. And so those type of offensive players, I think, aren't the best fit for Nic Claxton. Obviously, he should be better, but you can't discount like the roster and the way they play changing around them. That is a big factor in his, offensive downturn, I think.
And I'd also, and that can't be diminished. You can't just like walk over that. I'd also like to say that I was encouraged after the 2022-23 season of where he was going to be able to go in his development in terms of, taking advantage of advantages created for himself and being able to do some things like whether he's in the short roll. There were some plays we saw during that campaign where he gets the ball in the short roll. He takes one dribble, like really nice Euro step and finishes. And I just think we haven't seen as much of that. Like it's really all had to be put on a platter. It seems like for him these last couple seasons, and they just haven't had the guys to do it.
Right.
So
that can't be gone. That's the frustrating thing. That can't just be gone.
For him to reach that next level, or for him to be a guy where maybe some of the deficiencies he has, in terms of size and all those things are okay. He needs to be able to do some things. Like there needs to be some aspect of his offensive game where he can create something for himself. And that doesn't mean getting the ball, putting a crossover on somebody and going to the rim. It just means when you have this slight advantage, can you take advantage of it, really quickly and decisively?
Yeah. And that's what's frustrating because I am a Nic Claxton fan and I've been a fan of his game for a while. And so it's frustrating to see, yes, like you're not getting the stuff on the silver platter anymore, but that can't totally excuse all the rim finishing. I mean, like we saw him blow easy layups last year. Kind of way too frequently. But also like, dude, where like if you have a small on you, or you're in the short roll, like where is that stuff we saw from 2 years ago? There was too much of it to believe it was a total fluke, and I don't think it's gone. And that's where the motor and injury comes back to play. And like we're kind of having the same conversation again. And occasionally you see him like, okay, I am taking this coast to coast. And you just want that to be a consistent part of his game rather than 5 possessions a night. He preemptively decides, okay, I'm going to get this rebound and I'm going to get a shot. Like you just want it to be in the flow. All these factors, these sort of gray area, like team construction and injury and motor, they bleed into everything. So it makes it hard to kind of really know where Nic is at right now. In addition to like a changing NBA, there's just a lot of stuff going on around him.
All right, coming up after a quick break, closing out Locked On Nets, we'll give our opinions on where we think this is heading with Nic Claxton and the Nets. Is he going to be here for the long term? Is he going to be on the move? How does all that play out? Touch on that after a quick break. But before that, want to tell you about our friends over at Open Phone. Guys, if you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had an urgent need, maybe for a plumber or a service provider. If the first person didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. You moved on. That's why you need Open Phone. Open Phone is the #1 business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or computer. Guys, Open Phone lets me manage business calls and texts from a single app. The shared inbox feature is truly a game changer. Your team can jump into any conversation instantly without missing a beat, and their AI agent handles after-hours calls, answers common questions, and captures leads so you never miss a customer. Guys, Open Phone is offering my listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. That's OPENPHONE.com/LockedOnNBA. And if you have existing numbers with another service, Open Phone will port them over at no extra charge. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. Coming back from the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode with Lucas Kaplan of Nets Daily, talking about Nic Claxton and whether he is a fit with the Nets long term. We just touched on all of the strengths, deficiencies, the improvement, the regression, all of that stuff. And now we're in an interesting position because Nic Claxton is 26 years old. He's going to be 27 at the end of this coming season. Then it's just brought in a bunch of guys who are in the 19-year-old range. They're committed to this rebuild. Probably not going to be, at the quickest, they'll be a contending team maybe in like 2-3 years. So how does that factor in with Nic Claxton? Is he a guy that they'll consider trading? If you were the Nets right now, assuming that Nic Claxton is going to be around where he's been at these last few seasons, is he a guy that you would be, holding on to and trying to stick through with the rebuild? Or is he a guy who you'd be looking to cash in value at, before this contract gets too deep?
It's really tough
It is.
because you like, what is his value on the trade market? It has to be significantly lower than it was a year and a half ago, right? 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, even just the way we're talking about him. And yet, like, you can't, if he is a negative asset or absolutely nothing, like a net neutral asset, it doesn't make a lot of sense just to trade him for the sake of it, just like get him off the roster. However, if we're thinking real short term and real pragmatically about maximizing this lotto pick next year, him starting, it not only means you have another, possibly good center if he has a bounce back year on the team, but also it means Dayron's coming off the bench to like throw opposing backup centers in the trash can for 20 minutes a night and probably win those minutes by 8 points. I don't know, man. Like that, like that's not really what you want. And you just gave Dayron a little bit of money, and it's a bridge contract, and he needs to play. So I love Nic Claxton, and one of my favorite like film study dive guys when I really first started doing this, and so I do have this attachment to him, but it just doesn't feel like it makes a ton of sense to have him here. Like, why is he here?
Yeah, I agree with that. And, I just outlined why there obviously could be some concerns about how his game ages with the injuries, with the way he needs to play. By the time the Nets are really competing again, he's probably going to be close to 29, 30. So all that would lead me to believe he's probably not a guy who's here for the long term. But I've also said that with him, with the way his contract is structured, it's a descending deal. It's going to be more easily tradable in terms of salary matching purposes and just value in these final 2 seasons. And he's also a guy that there's a lot of questions about his back right now. So are you going to get any value for him before that gains clarity? Like, I was talking to people at Summer League and just gauging what the interest of him is around the league. And a lot of people were like, is his back right? Like, is he healthy? Like, what? And I was like, no, I don't know right now. Like, we'll have to see. So that's going to be a big part of it. I also think the market was, you thought maybe the Nets had an advantage on the market. The Lakers desperately need a center and a rim roller with Luka. The Suns need a center to pair with Devin Booker. The Suns get Malawach in the draft. The Lakers get DeAndre Ayton. So the market seems like it's kind of dried up, and it's to a point where I think he's going to be with the Nets this coming season. And I think it's going to be like, can he rehabilitate a little value? And then maybe they can flip him after that the following season when the contract is descending and, more attractive. But with that, if he's rehabilitating his value, how much does that hurt the Nets draft pick?
Right. It's always easy to be like, let's sell high, or like, let's do this if this happens. And then it actually happens. And you're like, oh,
yeah. And then I
wish we acted sooner.
Yeah. And then we also have the Dayron angle of it where Dayron looked really legitimately good for a few extended stretches last season, to the point where some Nets fans were like, is this our starting center? And like, should Claxton be taking a back seat? And like, we'll see how that plays out. But I just think with the timeline, with, the lottery pick, with Dayron in the wings, like with them drafting Danny Wolf also, like there's a lot of things that would lead you to believe that he could be on the move. And it's a logical move to move him. But with the questions about his back, with him coming off a down season, with his contract probably being more attractive in the final 2 years, and with the just limited market, it doesn't really seem like there's a move out there where the Nets are just going to like move off of him and dump him for nothing. Like that wouldn't really make any sense. So we'll see. We'll see where the Nets land with Claxton. But Lucas, I appreciate you taking the time as always. We got some more players we're going to hit on. So we'll continue this series, and hopefully you'll be back to break down some of these other guys. So thanks for taking the time as always. That does it for today's episode of Locked On Nets. Hope you guys really enjoyed the talk with Lucas. I think we hit on a lot of things relating to Nic Claxton's strengths, weaknesses, and his future with Brooklyn. If you guys do not already, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you enjoy my content, smash that like button, leave a comment. Let me know what you think about Nic Claxton. Let me know whether you think he's a long-term fit with the team, where you'd like to see him improve, and what you hope for him moving forward. But we got a lot more to touch on with the remaining Nets players in this series. We also have some news that we're going to have to break down eventually regarding free agency and other moves, training camp on the horizon. So I'll have all coverage of that and more here on Locked On Nets when I'm back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.